Welcome to Emotional Organization, the podcast where personal growth meets business strategy. I'm your host, Dr. Denaige McDonnell, and if you're here, you've probably been looking for a new way to approach your life and leadership, one that's grounded in practical, actionable advice and a deeper understanding of your emotions. Now, I'm not your therapist, but what I am is someone with decades of experience in business, leadership, and navigating some pretty tough personal challenges. Through this podcast, I want to help you get your business brain and emotional self in sync so that you can lead yourself and others with confidence, clarity, and purpose. Welcome to Emotional Organization. Today's episode is extra special for me because I get to introduce you to someone who not only understands business at a deep level, but also happens to be my husband. Keith McDonnell is the owner of Two River Management, Two River Investment, and the Honeydew Crew, Liverpool's newest property services company. His journey into entrepreneurship is as diverse as it is inspiring. Keith was raised by entrepreneurs, which gave him a first-hand look at what it takes to run a business. Over the years, he's worked an incredible range of industries, from wrecking yards and soap companies to oil field service and international large-scale team leadership. His experience leading complex and diverse teams has taught him the importance of culture building in business, finding that perfect balance where people come together not just for the task that's at hand, but for a shared purpose. Now, Keith is in the middle of a major life and career transition. Moving from Alberta to Nova Scotia, he not only is starting a new business in a new province, but also adapting to a different business culture and customer base. In stepping away from corporate life, he's been leaning a little bit more into his trade qualifications as a Red Seal millwright and learning to align his business with his needs, purpose, and priorities, something that he believes is essential for long-term fulfillment. Maybe what I admire most about Keith is his commitment to people and community. His ethical framework is really strong, and he has an ability to create businesses that are deeply rooted in purpose. He's not just building something for the purpose of profit. He's building something that fits his life, his values, and his vision for how work and community should come together. In this episode, we'll explore how culture influences business development, what Keith is doing to learn about his new market, and how he's navigating the transition from corporate leadership to hands-on entrepreneurship. Whether you're starting a new venture or evolving an existing one, this conversation is full of insights on building a business that aligns with your life and not just your bank account. So let's dive in. Keith, welcome to the podcast and thank you. This is my 20th episode and I can't think of a better way to celebrate that little milestone than with you. But our listeners don't know you. So let's start off by having you tell us just a little bit about you and your companies.
20th episode, and I believe we've been together for 20 years. You mentioned currently I've just started the Honeydew Crew, which is a property, you can call it a property management company. I'd like to call it a property care or property maintenance company. Property management often includes people who are finding tenants, collecting rent, dealing with that stuff. This business focuses on maintenance of the property. So we're doing gutter cleaning, window washing, lawn mowing, really focusing on, as we named it, the Honeydew Crew, is those honeydew chores. People will do those things on the weekend, right? It's like, oh, got to go out and clean the gutters, got to go out and, mow the lawn, those sorts of things is what we're focusing on. The other businesses we have is Two River Investments, which actually owns the Honeydew Crew, and that's more of a private investment firm, so it is investing in the Honeydew Crew. And we also do day trading and market trading, as well as a few privately placed investments with companies in Canada.
That's some great background about your companies. So tell us a little bit about you, Keith. Who is this guy, Keith McDonnell?
I usually say this to a lot of people about my mechanical background, so being a millwright by trade. I was baptized in oil, like engine oil, dirty engine oil, when I was about 3 years old. You say baptized, and the short story is, back in the day when there wasn't a lot of safety rules, my dad would take me and my brother to the shop with him, and he was a heavy-duty mechanic at the time for a paving company. So he was doing an oil change on a grader, and if you don't know, when you change oil in a grader, the oil pan is very large. It holds a lot of oil, and there's a lot of splashing. So it's probably about 2 feet by 2 feet is these drain pans. So my dad had drained all the oil, and he had pushed it out from underneath the grader, and it was in the walkway. And me being, I think, 2 or 3 years old at the time, was running all around the shop, of course not paying attention, tripped on this oil pan and ended up landing face first in used oil. Anyways, my mom wasn't
That sounds horrific, just so you know, from a parenting standpoint. I'm like, what a mess.
My mom wasn't too pleased when my dad brought me home. Apparently, he tried to clean me off as much as possible with the hose in the shop, which didn't work very well. But that's how I say I started my journey there in mechanics. So I was baptized in engine oil and just haven't really ever shaken off needing to work with my hands, needing to work with equipment, whether I'm repairing it, setting it up, improving it, dismantling it, you name it. So that's where I started. My next thing that I would say to people is, when I was in grade 9, my dad managed a wrecking yard, and there was a house there that was in Edmonton, so we moved there. And originally when we moved there, and it was a really, really big house, I was not happy because I was moving away from my friends, and I would have to take buses, which are not very good in Edmonton, and they weren't at that point in time. And but in hindsight, I would recommend to anybody who has got young kids, like, if you have an opportunity to go live at a wrecking yard, go there, because philosophically, a wrecking yard is the end of the life cycle of equipment and materials. When you're done with something, when most people think cars, right? It's like when you're done with a car, you can no longer sell it. You can no longer part it out. It goes to the wrecking yard. It gets crushed. It gets sent to a mill where they melt it down into its various components, whether that's aluminum, steel, you name it. But there's way, way, way more things that go to a wrecking yard than just cars. The wrecking yard that we worked at, if I remember correct, and I don't think it was TELUS at the time, it may have been AGT or something, they brought in like truckloads and truckloads of what you would call mainframes or server racks, like just metal everywhere. We got carloads that were filled with bicycles and random stuff that came from police auctions. And you'd be like, oh, well, what gets auctioned off at a police auction? And really what we got is the stuff that nobody wanted to buy. But there's all sorts of valuable stuff there. So you basically get to see the end of the life cycle for a lot of stuff. And if you think about it and reflect on it, you go, oh, well, all this stuff started out as brand new, shiny stuff. And you're truly at the end of that life cycle. And it is a cycle. It gets scrapped, it gets melted down, it gets turned into usable components again. So, and in that time at the wrecking yard, I got to learn a lot of skills. I got to learn how to dismantle cars. It may sound pretty bad. I got to learn how to break into cars, because a lot of cars come in and there's no keys, and you got to open the door, you got to pull out gas tanks, you got to pull out batteries, you got to check the trunk. So you need to know how to get into those pretty quick. You learn how to hotwire cars. You learn the value of things. When you pull out a battery, oh, that's a deep cycle battery, and that's not a deep cycle battery. They have different values, all sorts of stuff.
It's fascinating. So there is a really wide range of businesses and experiences that you've had with your family. And so it doesn't slip past me that part of your motivation for the company that you've got right now, and I mean, you've even got it on your website, that your great-grandfather, multiple great-grandfather, was the lighthouse keeper on Stoddart Island here in Nova Scotia. And so that story of service and resilience, although that's where you started with your own family, it feels like that's a common theme that's actually pulling at you now in this version of your life. And so I'm just curious to hear from you how that kind of connection to your family and sort of following them in the footsteps of your forefathers, how that's affecting you right now as a man, as a business owner.
Yeah. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that thinking about my, if you want to call it my identity or my roots, and not like, where did I come from? I came from my mom and dad, but, what was mom and dad's life like? What were my grandparents' life like? For example, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and he suffered a lot of trauma due to that. It's, how did those things affect people? And how did my dad end up in Manitoba? And so when you started researching the genealogy, at first, I wasn't overly interested, but, then, things started to change and understanding my Métis past and everything else and going, okay, what's the history of the Métis people? And then finding out that, my dad's side of the family started out with Michael Rayton, who came from Ireland and settled in Shag Harbor in Nova Scotia. And from all the research that you've done and that I've done in reading, apparently he was a fairly wealthy, merchant sailor, doing shipping down to the West Indies and all up and down the East Coast. And then I think what really impacted me is understanding that, he died in a shipwreck with, if I understand, his two youngest kids. And that really changed the family fortunes. From everything that I've read, up until that point, the family was relatively wealthy, relatively well off. They owned property. They owned Emerald Isle or Stoddart Island. Michael Rayton had advocated, and if you want to say fought, pushed pretty hard to get that lighthouse set up. And when I think about it, it's like, well, when you put up a lighthouse, it's not just, hey, I want business. And if I remember correct at the time, Nova Scotia, I think we were Canadian at the time, so the province of Nova Scotia was offering money. So it wasn't just like, hey, I need to get money. It was, well, he's a sailor, and if you go out to Shag Harbor and you go around in that area, you'll find out that it's the waters aren't necessarily great. There's definitely some risk to sailing in there. So what I see was Michael Rayton was like, no, I want to get this lighthouse. Yeah, there's some compensation for it, but it actually helps me in my sailing and the community around me. And so, some of the family went on to continue operating that lighthouse into the early 1900s. But then what ended up happening is my great-grandmother, Aggie, ended up going to Manitoba and giving birth to my grandfather. And it might be one generation more, it might be great and that sort of stuff. But lo and behold, when they went to Manitoba, Aggie and her husband, what did they do? They started a store. And that's, how my grandfather met my grandmother. And so when I look back at that, and even my thoughts of studying my Métis past, I think Métis, being that, they were mixed of European and First Nations backgrounds, is they were very much entrepreneurial as well. They were essentially the deal makers or the go-betweens. So all that stuff, when you say, how does this affect you? And, how do you think of yourself as a man and that sort of stuff, is I really do think that in my blood, there are entrepreneurial roots. Myself, I'm always looking at stuff and I'm like, this could be so much better. And it's not just money, but now it's really like, how do I add value to the community, to the industry, that sort of stuff. And that brings us to where we are now, and I think it's a much longer story about how we ended up in Nova Scotia. Obviously, the short story is you and I fell in love with Nova Scotia and said, "Hey, let's get there." Had an opportunity, and we did get here. But we're here in Liverpool now. I look around, and it's like, what do people need? What I see is we see an aging demographic, and and I don't disrespect that at all. But what I see is even myself at 51 years of age, I'm like, do I really want to climb up on that ladder? Do I really want to get up and work at heights? Those sorts of things. Is there somebody who can do this for me, sort of thing? And I see a lot of need for that. I also see through our own experience and then talking to other people that are in the community is it is very difficult to find somebody who can do these jobs for you. If you've been in the community for a long, long time, you obviously know lots of people who are willing to help in what I call the gray market. Nova Scotia works a lot on Facebook, and it is very much word of mouth where it's like, oh, we need something. And we've mentioned our neighbor here, Johnny, who has been, I consider a godsend of hooking us up with some good contractors along the way. I would have never found those people. We would have never found those people unless we had met Johnny and made the relationship with him and said, hey, can you help us out find a roofer or find that sort of stuff? So, now talking to people, I'm like, yeah, I do want to be that service provider that solves those problems for people.
There is such a difference in culture between the different communities that we've come to. So, and you talked about that, even to where you find your subcontractors and how you make those connections, where I think that when you're living in a big city, when you've got things that are very abundant and accessible to you, it is very easy to find them, and the demand is sort of comes up in a different place. And then here in a smaller, more rural community, and I see this even in northern BC and northern Alberta and some of the work that we've done up there, in seeing those same similar traits where the communities are stronger because they have to be. Because when things don't work out well, when you're living rural and remote, you absolutely need to depend on your neighbors in order to make it through those tough times. Whereas in the city, it's a little bit different. The infrastructure is different. And so being such a relationship-based environment that we're here, building a business looks different. And your business is built on trust and reliability. So I'm really curious to hear from you how you go about ensuring that you establish that kind of relationship of trust and reliability so that your customers feel confident in you and your services.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think, transferring from Alberta, where we were at, and I would say Alberta near the big cities, right? We spent time in Calgary and Edmonton, the two biggest cities. It is a way, way different situation, business-wise and business culture-wise, than it is here. So out there, if we needed something, you Google it, you contact somebody, and it's relatively transactional. So the trust, as you mentioned, the reliability is one, it's built into their websites, it's built into when they first meet you, when they're on site, that sort of stuff. And you just kind of trust that. Yeah, and you look for reviews, right? Do they have 4 stars, 5 stars, that sort of stuff.
Right.
That's where you're kind of finding trust in a transactional environment, is what I would call it. Here, it's far different, and transitioning to that, at first it was like, okay, when we moved here, it's like, okay, let's take our time, let's get set up, let's do some quote unquote market research. Find out what the community wants, where we can fit in, where we can start businesses. And it was really quick to understand oh no, this isn't like, hey, I have a flashy website and I got a whole bunch of reviews. This really is word of mouth. Because when we started talking to people, it's like, oh, do you know a good plumber? And they start mentioning names, and we were Googling, right? We're like, where is this? Well, they don't have a website. They don't have a Facebook page. They have absolutely nothing. what they have is a reputation in the community where multiple people have recommended them. And they're like, yeah, here's their phone number and here's their email. Go and reach out to them. And at first, coming from that transactional environment, you go, oh yeah, this is, some fly by night person, are they really going to screw stuff up? And then you start finding out, oh no, these are people who know their stuff. And so the trust is really all this word of mouth and reputation on what people have to say in their experience. Mm-hmm. So to your question, it's like, okay, so here I am. Here we are. We're new to town. Nobody knows who we are. How do I build that trust? And simply, it's like, well, I actually have to get out and socialize and be part of the community. They need to see me. They need to interact with me. They need to know who I am, what I'm about. And I would say that's a big difference from when we were in Alberta, because in those cities, people don't want to take the time to talk to you and find out your history and find out who you are and what you want to know. And they're like, yeah, are you insured? What's your reviews like? Okay, go get the job done. Here, my belief anyways, and who knows, maybe I'll find it different, is, yeah, no, people need to know me before that happens. And I'll give you an example. The other day, I drove down to go check out a job. Somebody had called and said, hey, they had a plugged gutter. So I went down this street into this cul-de-sac. And as I got to the end of the cul-de-sac, I saw this guy there, and he's, chopping away at ice because it had snowed and melted and all the rest. And I just stopped, and I'm like, hey, how are you? And just like, no, I got to get into this Nova Scotia culture and groove. Everybody wants to talk to each other. They're very nice. They want to get to know you. So him and I ended up talking for, oh man, 30, 40 minutes, just shooting the breeze. And, part way through it, he's like telling him that we moved here. Oh, so what do you do? Pulled out the card, gave it to him. He knew that I was a millwright, and then he started telling me a story. I think it was his brother-in-law, not to be surprised, runs a fishing boat. They go out and get lobster. But apparently he's got a problem with the alternator on this thing. The belt is slipping. So, I'm just like, okay, hey, I'm a millwright. I understand this stuff. I kind of like, well, check this and this. And, well, it's not my business. I want to be in the property maintenance. I just have a need to help and add value. What I was thinking about the whole time is, here's this guy hopping into this fishing boat, going out into the ocean, to go get lobster. And I know nothing about lobster fishing. So, do they go out a mile, miles, 10 miles, hours? I have no idea. But anyways, they're out in the middle of the ocean, which is a very unfriendly, unforgiving environment, with an engine with an unreliable alternator setup. That's a recipe to be stranded. And I'm like, all I thought to myself is, I want to go and fix this guy's problem, because I don't want this guy being stranded out in the middle of the ocean because a belt got thrown or whatever. So, so anyways, there's an example of, I think,
it's a
how I'm building
example.
trust.
Yeah, it's a perfect example, and taking a slower approach and not being in a rush. And I think that is part of the difference between city and rural, is that sort of sensation that you're not so amped up. You don't have so much busyness that prevents you from taking the time to, to move from being transactional to relational. But that example actually just leads right into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, which was around, you are a brand new startup, right? This is your first season. So when you're deciding what services to offer first, I mean, literally this guy on the street is essentially offering you work that isn't quite where you're aimed at right now, but also potentially something that might be viable if it's a need, might be good for you. So how do you decide what to offer first, and how do you decide when to offer new services?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's focus on this one example, because in the moment I was kind of thinking through it. because he started explaining this problem, and he wasn't like, hey, can you come and fix this? He was asking for advice. So at the point in time, and and when I handed him the card, when we started talking about this, I said, hey, look, I want to help. And I said, if I think it's his brother-in-law, if your brother-in-law needs help with this, if you can't figure this out, if the advice that I've given you, doesn't work and you still need help, give me a call. Of course, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this seems to be a service that somebody would want to pay for. It's valuable. Yeah, I could get into, hey, I'm a mobile marine mechanic. I can come out and fix stuff. It's like, well, no, that's not my core business. I do want to focus on home maintenance. So really, to me, I think if I went out and helped this guy, it would be for free. It would be just somebody in the community coming out and help. And then it would be like, hey, look, my business focus is home maintenance. I just help you fix your alternator, whatever the problem is. It's like, look, if you like that and you need your gutters cleaned or you need your windows washed, you got my card, you know where I'm at, give me a call. But back to your point about, how do you pick and choose the services? So I think that point that I just made is you basically need to stay focused. I think you and I have probably seen or probably experienced what happens when you go too broad, when you go, well, I'm going to do absolutely everything. Well, you end up either doing absolutely everything for not very much money, or you end up doing absolutely nothing because you're just all over the place. So I think, and you've heard me say this before, is you got to do your market research first, and you just keep on investigating. And like this idea, the Honeydew Crew started with talking to one of the gutter contractors out here, and when he was giving a quote for the gutters on our house, and I said, hey, if there was a business that started up here that you would like to see, what it would be. And he said, oh, gutter cleaning. He goes, yeah. He goes, I want to be focused on installing and repairing gutters. He goes, so many people ask me to come and clean their gutters. And it's one of those things. Well, then he's got to go buy extra equipment. He's got to have a different pricing structure. He's got to be like, it stretches him thin. But that to me was like, okay, now I'm going to go investigate this. And that's where I kind of found, okay, this whole thing of property maintenance seems to be kind of a package. And one seems to be people don't want to work at heights. And I understand that. I mean, I don't want to work at heights. It's dangerous. It's hard on your body, those sorts of things. And it's like, oh, well, what's at heights? Well, there's gutter cleaning. There's window washing. There's pressure washing. There is painting, all that sort of stuff. And then it was like, okay. And then talking to more people are capable of doing it, but they'd rather do something else with their time, and they've got money to pay somebody to do that. And once again, it comes to those things of, hey, why do I want to be out there mowing my lawn this weekend? I'll hire somebody to come out here while I'm working, and they can mow it during the week, and I can just enjoy it on the weekend. But it basically stopped there because it could easily get into, well, now I'm doing home repair, right? Now I'm going out and fixing people's shelves and
Sure.
stuff like that.
I think what you're talking about here, and you do a really good job of bringing in the conversation of, in the effort, especially when you're building your business, right? And you really are doing that legwork to talk with people and find out what they need. There is also some kind of sense of interest or urgency or attraction maybe as the business builder to kind of be all things to all people. So when somebody gives you an idea, it is really easy to kind of bring that onto your plate and go, oh, I can do that as well. And, you and I have certainly had that experience in our past businesses, like you mentioned, where we've tried to do that. And what it does is it adds a lot of unintentional complexity to not only just your processes that you've got, but also you're bringing in new capital costs, you're bringing in new overhead costs, and then you're really splitting your ability to be able to develop your competence in any specific area. And I think that as a new business owner, you really are trying to hone in on pretty small area and become really, really good at it as your foundational base. And so I think that that's an important maybe pitfall to mention for the listeners is that, although it can be really interesting and appealing to you to want to take on more work and diversify yourself because you feel like that's going to get you more clients, that in the end, it can kind of shoot you in the foot. So when you do decide that you want to add new service offerings or add new products, that really should be something that you think through beyond the moment, because it can be something that sort of erodes the foundation of your company really early on, and perhaps even something, where you think you're doing something for the good, but it's not.
Yeah, I agree with that concept, because if I look at what we've done with the Honeydew Crew so far, all our efforts have been focusing in on home maintenance. And if we spent a lot of time honing our messages on our website and on Facebook, and even I would say the talking points when we're talking to people in the community about what we do has been a lot of work. The moment you start getting into something else, it stretches you way, 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 way too thin. Several years ago, I started trading, and there's a legendary trader, he's dead now, by the name of David Paul. And I think his, whatever you want to call it, his analogy or example of what you need to do to be a good trader echoes through not just being a trader, but everything you do. And what he says is, he uses a dentist as an analogy. And he says, okay, so, you know dentists, you know what they do, and typically everybody says dentists make a lot of money, which I'm assuming they still do. And he says, so, when you walk in the door of a dentist office and when you get into the dentist chair, that dentist, he or she is not sitting there going, oh, I'm going to charge this person $1,000 a day and my margin is, 18.5%. And I got to make sure that I only use so much Novocaine because it's, it's expensive. That dentist is actually focused on performing the best procedure. Let's say they're doing a filling for you, performing a tooth filling procedure the best that they can. They are trying to essentially perfect it. And that's what brings in the money. And this is where I think reviews and word of mouth and trust comes in. If that dentist does not perform very good fillings and the procedure is not executed very, very well, they won't make very much money, because eventually they just won't have clients, or they'll have very few clients, or they will have not high quality clients that are just coming in with, hey, I'm coming to you because you're the only person available and you're cheaper than everybody else. Why are you cheaper? Well, because you're not very good. So back to this is like, when I got this equipment, I got this, what they call an interceptor, which allows me to vacuum out gutters up to 40 feet above. And I'm like, oh, well, I need to practice using this equipment. I need to practice going out and doing stuff. So when I was out there doing this in early January, it had nothing to do with like, hey, how much money am I going to make? It really was, how do I do a good job? And then if you want to talk about how you're making money, I'm also timing it. I'm going, okay, well, how long did it take to load up the truck? How long did it take to unload the truck? What sort of issues do I have when I have this equipment sitting out there? For instance, now I've added a collapsible table to the equipment that I run in the truck, because I need a table to kind of lay out the tools while I'm doing this stuff. So it had very little to do. Like, I'm not sitting there going, oh, how much money am I going to make? I'm like, no. How do I perfect this? How do I leave the client happy? And that's the other thing, is I'm talking to these people and going, well, do you think that was good? Was that a good job? Or were you just kind of like, I could have done it better?
Yeah, I love how focused you are on building that kind of competence right out of the gate. I mean, we know from experience that competence, I mean, it's an area that you're proficient in. You were a leader for over a decade with learning and development and competence. So you understand the concepts of competence really well. But what it sounds like to me is that you really do have and I'm going to use words, I don't know whether they're going to be the words that you would use, but it sounds to me like you're really intentional with the culture that you're building in your new business. and the way that you're approaching things, because you are very concerned with the experience of your client and how your client feels about not only the service that they're getting from you, but also the experience of getting that service from you. And then you're also very considerate of what your own experience is. And I know that you're doing planning for how you're going to expand the company, and so what the potential experience is for your workers. And so all of that consideration of people's experience is culture building activity. So I'm curious, how is this something that just comes naturally to you, or is this something that you're kind of intentionally thinking about?
I don't know if maybe it's something that came naturally to me. But I don't necessarily think so. Yeah, I don't think you mentioned in the intro. So I have an MBA. So I went through an MBA program, and that's where I met my business partner, Tom. I think I really clued into it when I was in the MBA, because there is my study, the capstone project that I did was really rooted in the academic theory of culture. And what that means. And so to me, the definition of culture is just a summation of all the behaviors in a defined group. So you and I, we have a culture. There are behaviors that we have amongst ourselves. As soon as we bring in our daughter, it's a different culture because her behaviors are in there and we behave differently with her. And just expand from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a culture at a hockey game of 10 to 50,000 people in an arena or stadium. So it's like, hey, are you building a culture? I think I'm doing that implicitly now. I think when I learned about it in the MBA, I was doing it explicitly. I was thinking about, what sort of culture do I want to build and that sort of stuff. But if you think of the basic thing, it's like it's just your behaviors. And I think it was Gandhi who basically said, be the change you want to see in the world, which is basically like, if you behave a certain way, it will impact the world around you, that they will see that behavior and go. So back to your point of, yeah, I am building a culture. The business plan calls for hiring on employees. I do want to expand this. I want to have multiple trucks. I want to have another truck on by the end of the year. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, yes, I want the customer to have an experience, a positive experience from the time that they find us and are informed of us. I want them to have a positive experience. I want them to go, whether they see the Facebook page or the website or meet me in person or whatever, I want them to be left with a positive feeling, whether they do business with us or not, to the point where, whether it's me or somebody shows up at the door, I truly want to be showing up at the door and going, not like, hey, I'm here to clean your gutters and clean your windows. It's like, hey, how are you doing today? I don't even know if the customer's going to be home, right? They might say, hey, go clean the gutters. I ain't going to be home. But when I meet them, I want to leave them with a positive experience. I want to listen to what's going on. Because you may find out that they go, oh, yeah, I want my gutters cleaned. And then you find out that, oh, yeah, it's because I have a real big problem with this downspout over there. Well, by listening to that, I can leave them with a better experience because I'm like, oh, I'm going to go take a look at that gutter.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see what's going on with that downspout and see it's not just cleaning the gutters. It's like, hey, I'm going to do that. But same thing, right through until, basically I give them the invoice and get paid. I want them to have a positive experience through and through. So yeah, everything I'm focused on is that experience. And my belief is the money will flow after, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way to approach business, and it shapes things a little bit different, right? And I mean, granted, not everybody that's starting in business has the luxury of being able to sort of lead with values first, right? Depending on the individual situation. But I think that when approached thoughtfully, that there's definitely room and space for businesses to be developed in better alignment with people. And that's certainly something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast before. And so doing all of these things, back to that sort of conversation of being all things to all people as kind of a risk of business. Another version of that is just how many different hats you have to wear in order to get your business off the ground. So right now you're a solopreneur. Yeah, I got a big face on that one. As a solopreneur, you're kind of doing it all. Can you sort of take us through what it looks like? Because we're just to sort of set the context and the stage for people. I mean, the business was started just a month ago. It is gutter cleaning and property service, and we're sitting here in the middle of February right now. So we still have a few weeks before that season's really going to turn on. And you have to have a lot of hats on in order to get your small business up and running. And so what parts of the business are you loving doing? What are you finding challenging? Can you give us a little bit of a run through just on all the different things that you do so that the listeners can get a little bit more of a feel for not just the end goal of doing the gutter cleaning service, but what does it actually take to build this business?
You mentioned solopreneurs. People are just trying to do it all themselves. When somebody says when you run a business, you're wearing all hats. You are the chair of the board, the CEO, the person who cleans the floor and takes out the trash. You are literally doing all those roles. So right now, am I the worker in the truck? Am I the foreman going out and doing the jobs? Nope. Today after we finish this, I am going to be the VP of marketing or the marketing manager. I am looking into where I can start advertising more, understanding where this market's at, right? Like where do people need this property maintenance? Exploring that. In December, I was the executive administrator. I had to go out and register the company with what's called the Joint Stocks Registry in Nova Scotia. I had to go get insurance quotes. Then I turned into a procurement manager because I'm like, I got to go buy a truck. I got to go buy, so this gutter vac, it's like, well, it comes out of the States. I got to figure out how to get this thing into Canada. And then I got to go buy ladders. I got to go, all this stuff. So I was procurement manager. At the same time, I was the CFO, chief financial officer, or the controller. And then it's like, you got to do bookkeeping. And so your question of, what do you like the least? I think it's bookkeeping. As much as I can do it, it's just like, it's a very tedious task. So
yeah, good point. Yeah, there is a ton of things, right? And you have to kind of, while you're building out your business and trying to find funding so that you can, do expansion and growth, you're doing all of the marketing, you're doing all of the legal part of things, you're sourcing out your equipment, you're trying to figure out how everything's actually going to fit on the truck. You're dealing with permitting and legislation and, at the same time as trying to build your customer base, get to know people. There's so many things. And so through this process, there's an awful lot of learning. There's an awful lot of time that gets invested. And at the same time, you're working within something that's also really uncertain. And so it sounds to me like just that process of wearing many hats. And for any business owner that's starting off, you're at such risk of being overwhelmed and overloaded. And how's that experience been for you? And what are you doing to help yourself manage through all of these competing demands? Because it is a lot when you're in the early stages of a company.
Yeah, I think honestly, when you're an entrepreneur or, as you said, a solopreneur where you're only one or a few people, you're probably your worst enemy. So I think the first thing is to understand that you as an entrepreneur are putting a lot of pressure on yourself. And usually that pressure is, I got to make money, right? So you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to perform. But I think the second part is realistically, in a day, you're only going to get a couple big ticket items done. I'll use the example of, so getting insurance was very, very, very difficult. So my top priority for probably several weeks in December, every day, was I'm going to get insurance today. So that was one of those tasks. So that's what I mean by you probably only can get a couple tasks done in the day. And so it really is, okay, well, these are the top 2 or 3 things I'm doing. Like insurance, it was like, okay, I've done that part, move on to the next one.
It sounds like that's one of your strategies for keeping overwhelm at bay, is just really trying to embrace a one bite at a time kind of philosophy to building.
Don't get me wrong, there are people who really can get stuff done out there. I totally respect them. I'm almost envious. It really is, like you mentioned, overwhelmed. If you just sit there at the beginning of your day and just go, well, I'm going to get stuff done for the business, you will end up doing what you want to do, not what you need to do. So you can get pretty overwhelmed pretty quick with lots of stuff. And then if you don't really have a plan, you end up focusing on what you want to do, which works out in the beginning. But if you don't start that discipline of, I have to do things that need to get done, you will end up having a discipline, a culture of doing what you want to do. And I don't believe that is a recipe for success in business, unless what you want to do truly aligns with what you need to do. And sorry, one other thing I wanted to add in there is, because you and I have gone through this multiple times with businesses that we do, is there are a lot of days, a lot of days at the end of the day, you don't feel like you've accomplished what you feel like you've taken 2 steps forward, not 2 steps back, not 1 step forward. Yes. You really do need, you talk about reflection practices and stuff like that. And I don't do it very well, but I would say you really need to pause at the end of your day, at the end of your week, at some sort of interval, and take inventory of what you've accomplished, because it is so easy to ignore all those things you've done. If I listed out everything that I've done since December, I would be pretty impressed with myself, from getting all that administrative corporate stuff, accounts set up, bank accounts set up, all the rest. It's like purchasing equipment, dealing with insurance. You keep on listing off. You go, oh, that's actually pretty impressive. And if somebody's like, so have you made any money yet? Nope. It's like, but I put everything into place that should allow me to make money when I start doing this stuff. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. Exactly. Yeah, no, it's insightful. So, and I think that's part of what people tune into this podcast for, is to start to understand really the complexity between, your emotions and your business, right? And and it's tough, because in order to be successful, you do have to be able to manage both and find a way so that one is fueling the other. So before I ask you just a couple closing questions, I want to ask you something about, what do you do to fuel yourself? So you put in all of this effort into building your business, and you've got lots of work that's happening in that space. What fuels Keith? What are you using to refill your tank and keep you feeling strong as a human?
Well, I like to walk. I like to walk early in the morning. So that's one thing that I do to fuel myself. I think the other part too is I do set limits on my time. Usually by 6:30, 7 o'clock, I'm done. I mean, I know I could spend until midnight, but it's like, no, I actually need to stop and say, okay, what now? I'm back to my life, So it's like, yeah, by 6 or 7 o'clock, it's like, carve that out and go, nope. Even if I'm just vegging in front of the TV with the dogs or whatever it is. I just started Johnny's Hall right next door here. He runs a concert every Friday night. I started singing there. So like last night, I'm like, yeah, I'm taking time out to do my thing. So when you're saying, what are you doing to refuel? I don't think it's like, oh, go find something and go do it. But it's actually, it just starts with going, no, I'm actually stopping my brain and everything from focusing on this business for X amount of hours during the day. And last but not least, which I think I've been doing quite well, is I do make sure I get into bed at a decent hour.
Awesome. We've got many people that are listening that are people that are dreaming of leaving their corporate life or business in large industries to try and start something of their own. As somebody who has traveled this road a couple times, what advice would you give to somebody who's trying to make that transition?
Yeah, I think the advice I wanted to give, the first thing in my head was leave now, do it. Yeah. But I obviously know lots of people are in a position of like, oh my goodness, I have bills to pay, I have mouths to feed, that sort of thing. I think a more nuanced, respectable way of saying this is when you're in the corporate role, when you are, quote unquote, working for the man, when you're doing that, there are learnings to be had. So spend that time to learn when you are in that corporate world. As you discussed, I mean, I spent 14 years working for a multinational corporation, traveled around the world, dealt with, the bureaucracy, the being a number, that sort of stuff for many years. And, there were times where it's just like, oh, as you said, the suck. It's like, truly, corporations will suck the life out of you. There was a guy that came and spoke to our MBA class, and he said something that still sticks with me. And he says, corporations, good corporations that are turning a lot of profit, they are designed and they are operated to extract the maximum amount of value out of all its resources. Human resources is one of them. It is there to extract value out of you. But at the same time, while you're in that corporation, you can get value out of that corporation, not just in terms of compensation, but learning things. Take those learnings and then know that they will actually pay off when you start doing your own stuff, right? When you're like, oh, how does this company make money? When you really analyze it and think about it, and then you flip it into your own new business. How am I going to make money? Where is my market? What market do I want to tap into? What does that market look like? So I would say that's my advice. I would say leave as soon as you can before that corporation sucks the life out of you, and it will. There are very few people that I know that have had a corporate career and came out of it going, I'm sure glad I spent decades in that corporation. Usually what they're saying is, oh, I'm sure glad I spent decades and I got a nice pension, which are pretty rare now. Most people get out of corporations and are like, oh, I'm glad that's over and done with.
Yeah. Yeah, so. I talked about that fairly recently on one of the episodes and just had mentioned that, you talk about competence and development and sort of the paths that people take. When you're in an organization, you make these incremental changes to your own personal development plan in alignment with what the organization sees for you. And that's not necessarily going to take you to a place of personal fulfillment because you are ultimately working towards the goal of whatever that organization is. Difference being when you are running your own business, you're choosing your own and you're crafting your own competence development plan according to your business and your own personal goals, which of course is taking you in more alignment to sort of that soul happy place that we're looking for in order to feel fulfilled and happy and all those good things in life. So yeah, I think that that's a great recommendation and some advice and insight that's really valuable. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. And I really do appreciate you being a role model for others in saying, we can build better businesses. And we do that by putting trust and reliability and relationships first. So Thank you, Keith, for joining me on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen with the Honeydew Crew, and I wish you and your company the very best in the future.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to how it turns out too.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me on another episode of Emotional Organization. The past couple episodes, I have focused on doing some interviews of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, and I really love talking to people and engaging with people who are actually in the work right now so that I can bring you insights and information and some strategies that hopefully are going to help you to be able to really step into new versions of yourself. I'm inviting all of you to head on over to emotionalorganization.com so that you can check out more of the podcast and also see some of the other fun stuff I've got up my sleeve.